On a quiet evening in September 1977, at around 9:30 p.m., Kate Walker, her husband, and their two young sons were making their way home along the A30, a major road that runs through the Somerset countryside towards Land's End in Cornwall. They had been visiting relatives and were travelling from Yeovil to Chard, a journey they had made countless times before. They were still several miles from home as they approached Windwhistle Hill, a particularly isolated stretch of road cutting through the English countryside. What happened over the next few hours would stay with this family for decades, though not always in ways they could fully remember or understand. As the walkers came up towards the top of the hill, something caught their attention. Off to their left, hovering in the night sky, was a huge orange light diffused by cloud, giving it an ethereal quality. At first, Kate and her husband tried to rationalize what they were seeing. There was a power station in the area, along with pylons, and perhaps this strange glow was somehow connected to them. That explanation made sense, at least initially. But the closer they got, the more apparent it became that this was something else entirely. According to Kate's later recollections, the object was enormous, somewhere between 200 and 300 feet in length. It was cigar-shaped and appeared completely motionless, hanging approximately 1,000 feet above the ground. She described it as totally static, as if it was simply fixed in place against the night sky, defying everything they understood about how aerial objects should behave. It was around this time that Kate noticed the Windwhistle Inn, a public house on the other side of the road. Under normal circumstances, its windows should have been ablaze with warm light from inside, the kind of welcoming glow you would expect from a country pub on an autumn evening. Instead, the building sat in complete darkness. The only light visible was a faint glow coming from an upstairs window, which struck Kate as deeply wrong. Something compelled her to glance at her watch. When she did, a chill ran through her. The time read 10 past 10 p.m. This made no sense whatsoever. They had left at around 9:30 p.m., and given the distance they had covered, the time should have been barely any later than when they had set off. Somewhere along that stretch of road, approximately 40 minutes had simply vanished. Kate turned her attention back to the glowing object, now almost directly overhead. Panic began to set in. She urged her husband to put his foot down, to get them away from this place as quickly as possible. He did exactly that, and they sped away from Windwhistle Hill and the mysterious craft that hung above it. The next clear memory Kate had was of seeing a headlight approaching them from the opposite direction. It belonged to a cyclist, and they were now close to home. The transition from that lonely hilltop to this familiar stretch of road seemed almost instantaneous. When they finally arrived home, Kate immediately checked the clock. She was confronted with a time that did not add up. It was now 10:50 p.m. Even accounting for the earlier discrepancy, they had lost another significant chunk of time. The distance from Windwhistle Hill to their home should have taken roughly 15 minutes to cover, yet nearly 30 additional minutes had disappeared without a trace. Kate considered mentioning this to her husband, but he seemed entirely unconcerned by the evening's events. So she did what many people in a situation might do. She simply put it out of her mind. Several days later, however, the Walker family made the same return journey. As they approached that same stretch of road near the top of the hill, in approximately the same location where they had witnessed the glowing object, something deeply unsettling was waiting for them. They could see two figures by the roadside. One appeared to be lying down, while another stood over them. Kate and her husband's first thought was that someone had been injured and needed help, so her husband began to slow the car. But almost immediately, the standing figure made a movement that defied all explanation. From where it stood at the roadside, it placed one of its legs into the middle of the road. Kate would later describe this figure as abnormally tall, with legs that were horrendously long and thin, completely out of proportion with any human body. Her husband reacted quickly. He navigated the car around this impossibly large leg, accelerated, and drove away as fast as he could. By the time they arrived home, the entire family agreed that what they had witnessed was remarkably strange. A human being simply could not have limbs like that. Despite the obvious strangeness of both encounters, the family heard nothing in the local newspaper and nothing on the local news. The incident gradually faded from active discussion, and for nearly 2 decades it remained largely forgotten. It was not until the mid-1990s that the memories began to resurface. By this time, Kate had remarried, and her two sons, Jeff and Tony, were in their mid-20s. One evening, when all three of them were together, they began discussing that strange night in September 1977. What emerged from that conversation would prove far more disturbing than Kate had ever imagined. Jeff, the eldest son, remembered his mother telling his father to put his foot down, but his recollection of what happened next was vastly different from what Kate had assumed. According to Jeff, when his father tried to accelerate, the engine died completely and the headlights went out. The car was suddenly without power. He recalled his father repeatedly trying to turn the engine over, becoming increasingly panicked as the vehicle refused to respond. But what struck Jeff most vividly was a strange sensation that accompanied this moment. Everything seemed to be happening in slow motion. He could also sense a very deep, humming vibration that was slow and rhythmic, as if some unseen force was pressing down on them. Then something even stranger occurred. Jeff recalled his father suddenly lunging across the inside of the car towards the passenger door. But here was the truly inexplicable part. Jeff had no recollection of his mother being in the passenger seat. All memory of her presence had simply gone. He could see his father bringing his fist down on the dashboard, though he could not hear any sound accompanying the action. Jeff then turned to check on his younger brother, Tony, but rather than looking frightened, Tony was gazing out of the window, seemingly excited by whatever was happening outside. This reaction baffled Jeff completely. As he turned his attention back to his father, he noticed that his father was pointing in his direction. It took Jeff a moment to realize he was not pointing at him, but at something visible through the back window. The expression on his father's face was one of sheer terror. Suddenly, Tony's voice cut through the strange silence, telling Jeff to look out of the window. Like everything else in this bizarre sequence, his brother's voice sounded dramatically slowed. Jeff turned to see what they were pointing at. Behind the car was something so terrible that Jeff felt almost paralyzed by fear. He could not bring himself to look at it directly. Instead, he put his head down against the back seat, trying to hide from whatever was out there. And then, just as it had happened with his mother, Jeff suddenly had no memory of Tony being beside him. In his perception at that moment, it was only himself and his father in the car. Even with his hands covering his face, Jeff became aware of an intense white light bleeding through his fingers. Instinctively, he removed his hands from his eyes. What he saw was light everywhere, both inside and outside the car, as if he was somehow suspended within the light itself. His last memory of the encounter was of a dark shape standing outside the car, close to the passenger window. Although he could not make out clear details, he could tell that this figure was very tall and was bending towards the window, looking in at him. It appeared human in basic form, but Jeff knew with absolute certainty that it was not human. Then his memory seemed to skip forward. The next thing Jeff was aware of, the car was moving again, and he could see the headlight of the cyclist approaching them. He recalled speaking aloud from the back seat, asking where he had come from. By the time they arrived home, all he could consciously remember was the orange glow, the cigar shape of the object, and the humming sound. everything else returned in fragments as the years passed. In the days following the incident, Jeff remembered that several of his school friends had been eagerly discussing strange UFO sightings at Windwhistle Hill that had created a buzz around town. He also revealed to his mother that he believed there had been a total of 5 figures outside their vehicle that night, and that all 4 members of the family had been taken. When that figure peered in at him through the window, he felt certain it was his turn to go. Following these remarkable revelations, Kate reported the encounter to UFO investigators, including Gloria Heather Dixon of the British UFO Research Association. In her report, she expressed disbelief at how casually they had dismissed the incident at the time. An article in the Yeovil Weekly News prompted several others to come forward. In 1991, a witness identified as Witness A, along with her husband and grandson, had witnessed a tall, strange figure staring in at them through their farmhouse window. Several days later, they observed a saucer-shaped object hovering nearby. Witness B reported an almost identical encounter happening to her mother and father in 1975. Witness C, a lorry driver, claimed that on Windwhistle Hill in 1976 or 1977, his vehicle suddenly behaved as though something else was controlling it for a distance of approximately 100 yards before releasing its grip. Witness D described an encounter from November 1959. She and her husband watched a large object shaped like a humming top near Windwhistle Hill from around 11 p.m. until 9 a.m. the following morning. They claimed to have been almost hypnotized by its presence and felt unable to speak about the events afterwards. The Walker family's encounter was far from unique during this period. The late 1970s saw a remarkable concentration of similar incidents across the United Kingdom. In December 1978, John Day, his wife Susan, and their 3 children were driving home to Essex after visiting Susan's parents in Harold Hill. The journey typically took 30 minutes. They set off at 9:20 p.m. When they arrived home and began preparing the children for bed, they were shocked to find it was 45 minutes after midnight. Over 3 hours had passed, and neither had any memory of the drive home. Over the following days, the family began experiencing strange nightmares of creatures with huge black eyes. They became scared to go to sleep. John contacted a local UFO organization, which passed his case to hypnotist Leonard Wilder. Under regression, John recalled a strange mist appearing after they set off, followed by a bright white light behind their vehicle that descended into a nearby field. A beam shot out and struck their car, lifting it from the road and dragging it towards what looked like a spaceship. He found himself inside a giant room, surrounded by tall figures, wearing tight silver-grey one-piece suits with balaclava-type helmets covering the bottom of their faces. Their eyes were bright pink with no eyelids. They performed procedures on him and communicated telepathically. Susan, though refusing hypnosis, experienced fragments of memory returning. She recalled being covered in a strange mauve liquid while creatures prodded her with pen-like devices. She also recalled a tall being with a balaclava-type hat placing his hand on her forehead, corroborating John's account before she blacked out. Around 6 months earlier, on the 19th of June 1978, the Mann family had a remarkably similar experience travelling between Berkshire and Gloucestershire. John, his wife Gloria, their 2 children, and John's sister Frances had set off from Brockworth shortly after 9:30 p.m, expecting to arrive home around 11 p.m. At approximately 10 p.m, having passed Stamford in the Vale in Oxfordshire with the children asleep, the 3 adults noticed a strange white light ahead. John pulled over for a better look. As he stepped from the car, a red light appeared near the white one and began growing larger, moving towards him. He could hear a mixture of a swishing sound and the scoring noise of a train's wheels against track. Gloria screamed at him to get back in the car. The next thing John knew, they were on a winding country lane with tall hedges, a road none of them recognised despite making this journey often. John had a strange feeling that if he had taken his hands off the wheel, the car would have driven itself. When they arrived home, it was just after midnight, over an hour late. The following day, John could not locate that mysterious road. All three adults discovered strange bruising on the backs of their right knees and rash-like markings on their arms and chests. Their daughter Natasha began having nightmares about strange people with funny eyes and someone taking Mummy and Daddy into another room. Under hypnosis by Jeffrey McCartney, John recalled a strange mist surrounding him after stopping. Tall figures in metallic suits and helmets removed the women and children, guiding them towards a column of light that carried them upwards. His next memory was of being in a large room, seated in something like a dentist's chair, while figures examined him. In February 1978 in Plymouth, Devon, a woman known as Mrs. G was pegging out washing in her backyard when a blue-white light appeared overhead. It stopped approximately 100 feet above her, and she found herself enveloped in light and rising in a column of brightness. She was surrounded by tall figures in tight, shiny metallic suits with what appeared to be balaclavas. They communicated telepathically. When she next became aware, she was standing in her yard. It was almost dark, and the washing remained in the basket at her feet. The similarities between these cases are striking. The strange lights, the vehicle malfunctions, the missing time, the tall figures in metallic suits with covered faces, the telepathic communication, the nightmares and fragmented memories, and perhaps most significant, the way witnesses initially dismissed these experiences, only for details to resurface years later. What was happening in the United Kingdom during the late 1970s? Were these random encounters cases of people being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was there something more coordinated taking place, some kind of systematic effort by an unknown intelligence? Kate Walker and her family lived with their fragmented memories for nearly 20 years before the full picture began to emerge. Whatever approached their car on Windwhistle Hill that September night, whatever looked in through the window at a terrified young boy named Jeff, left its mark on the family in ways they are still trying to understand. The lonely roads of Britain held many secrets during those years. Some have been partially revealed through accounts like Kate's, the Days, the Man's, and the many others who came forward. But the complete truth of what happened on those dark country roads remains just out of reach, glimpsed only in fragments of recovered memory and the lingering unease of those who experienced something they could never fully explain.